You say you don't care what people think. Then someone becomes slightly colder toward you, and suddenly you're replaying the conversation for 3 hours. You wonder if you talked too much, if your joke sounded strange, if you should send another message to soften what you said. You notice they viewed your story but didn't reply to you, and now your mind is quietly building a case against itself. This is the part nobody tells you. The problem isn't that you care what people think. Human beings are social. Of course you care. The problem is what caring makes you do. Because there is a difference between noticing someone's opinion and rearranging yourself to survive it. And if conversations about feminine psychology, self-mastery, and human behavior interest you, subscribe. We go much deeper than just be confident here. Most people think insecurity looks obvious. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes insecurity looks like being extremely agreeable. You rewrite a perfectly reasonable message 5 times because you're terrified of sounding rude. You say yes when you want to say no, then resent the person for accepting the yes you gave them. You explain a decision nobody asked you to justify. You feel guilty after setting a completely normal boundary because someone became disappointed. And you call all of this being considerate. Sometimes it is.
But sometimes excessive agreeableness is simply fear wearing good manners. That distinction matters. Because if your kindness disappears the moment you know someone might dislike you for it, then kindness may not be the only thing motivating you. You may also be trying to remain safe inside their perception of you. And that brings us somewhere deeper. Why does being misunderstood bother us so much? Because most of us are not merely communicating with people. We are constantly managing our image inside their minds. You want them to know you're kind. You want them to know you meant well. You want them to understand why you made the decision. You want the person who rejected you to eventually realize what they lost. You want the friend who misjudged you to discover the truth. You want the person who underestimated you to watch you succeed. Notice what's happening. Even when you say you've stopped caring, they are still psychologically involved. Your success is still performing for an audience. This is where Stoicism becomes useful. Epictetus built much of his philosophy around a brutally simple distinction. Some things belong to you, and some things do not. Your decisions belong to you. Your behavior belongs to you. Your standards belong to you. Someone else's interpretation of those things does not. And yet many women exhaust themselves trying to control both. You make the decision, then try to manage everybody's reaction to the decision. That is why boundaries feel so exhausting when you first develop them. You think setting the boundary is the difficult part. It isn't.
The difficult part is tolerating what happens afterward. Their disappointment, their silence, their accusation that you've changed, their little joke about you thinking you're too good now, their withdrawal. That discomfort creates the temptation to explain. And explaining feels productive because it gives you something to do. But sometimes explanation is simply an attempt to regain control. And this is the deeper truth behind caring too much what people think. It isn't always about judgment. Sometimes it's about control. You want control over the version of you that exists inside another person's mind, and you cannot have it.
Think about how much energy that requires. You can explain yourself beautifully and still be misunderstood. You can behave perfectly and still be disliked. You can be generous and still be called selfish by someone who benefited from your lack of boundaries. You can tell the truth and still become the villain in someone else's story. So here's the uncomfortable question I want you to answer in the comments. Where in your life are you still trying to control how someone sees you? Because once you identify that person, you'll probably identify a surprising amount of your emotional reactivity too. This is also why privacy has psychological power, not because you're trying to become mysterious. Mystery is overrated when it becomes performance. Real privacy is quieter than that. It is simply realizing that not everyone requires access to your internal world. Your plans do not need a committee. Your relationship does not need public analysis. Your boundary does not need a courtroom defense. Your next move does not need to be announced before it has survived contact with reality. The more you narrate your life, the more opinions you invite into decisions that were supposed to belong to you. And then you wonder why you can no longer hear yourself think. Self-possession often looks surprisingly uneventful. You pause before replying. You let an irritating message sit until your nervous system stops trying to write the response. You stop correcting every inaccurate assumption. You notice patterns instead of obsessing over isolated incidents. You say, "I can't do that," instead of producing a 5-paragraph explanation designed to make your no impossible to resent. And when someone becomes colder because you finally stopped overextending yourself, you resist the urge to chase the warmth back.
That is emotional discipline, not suppression. You still feel the discomfort. You simply stop giving discomfort executive authority. And yes, this may cost you something. Some people liked the version of you who was easier to influence, the version who could be guilted into changing her mind, the version who panicked when someone withdrew affection, the version who needed reassurance after every disagreement, the version who would rather betray herself than risk being called difficult. When that version starts disappearing, not everyone will celebrate. That does not automatically mean they are manipulative or malicious. Sometimes people are simply accustomed to the access you trained them to expect. Your responsibility is not to punish them for that. Your responsibility is to decide whether the old arrangement still respects you. This is where stop caring what people think becomes too simplistic. The goal is not to become indifferent to feedback. That would be foolish. Sometimes criticism contains information you need. Sometimes you are wrong. Sometimes someone's discomfort is exposing a blind spot rather than proving how powerful your boundary is. Discernment means asking a better question. Is this feedback useful, or am I simply afraid of being disliked? That one question will save you from two extremes: people-pleasing and arrogance. And eventually, something changes. You stop asking, do they approve of me? You start asking, do I approve of how I behaved? You stop asking, why didn't they choose me? You start asking, would I have chosen this situation if I weren't so desperate to be chosen? You stop asking, how do I make them understand? You start asking, have I communicated clearly enough for my own integrity? That is internal authority, and it is much quieter than confidence usually looks online. There are no dramatic declarations, no performance of being unbothered, no checking whether they noticed that you stopped caring. You simply begin spending less of your life inside other people's minds. If you want more conversations about becoming emotionally disciplined, discerning, and intentional, without becoming cold, subscribe. Because the woman who is difficult to destabilize is not the woman who never feels embarrassed, rejected, criticized, excluded, or misunderstood. She feels all of it. She simply stops treating every uncomfortable reaction as an instruction. You cannot control whether someone misunderstands you, rejects you, underestimates you, envies you, leaves you, or dislikes you. You cannot permanently manage your reputation inside every room you enter, and you were never supposed to. What you can control is whether their reaction becomes more important than your character, whether their approval becomes more important than your standards, whether their disappointment becomes more important than your self-respect. Maybe that is what real detachment actually is. Not the absence of feeling, not pretending you don't care, the willingness to care without surrendering command of yourself.